because he was in our preschool. And you learn something when you watch somebody from a very early age. And you can see from the start the intelligence, the curiosity, and through conversations, a rare integrity that is intrinsic in the person. It's not something that he's having to work to do. He was obviously an organizer in college. At a time when most of us had other things on our mind, like survival for one thing. He was already organizing. And, as a person of faith, and I think probably everyone here is, even if you're atheist, that you have a set of values that include humanism and taking care of the earth. We live in a time when that's rare. We live in a time that I don't think any of us could have foreseen coming. Attila the Hun is seen as a patriotic figure as long as they have a little flag on their thing. But sometime before he ran, and I hope you're comfortable with me sharing this, because you can get back at me. When Reverend Rigby's sober, he's one of the I understand you're speaking after me. Yes. None of the good stories. We'll try that out. But this touched me very much because he was raised here, and the values we're talking about transcend the Christian sect, right? There are things all over the world that people just care deeply about things. And he came and he was struggling with the possibility of running. He said, can I be an ethical person and also be a politician? Very important question. And my approach to it is a different kind of integrity. Because once you're in power, you never see that choice between pure good and pure evil. And you have to trust that guidance that's inside you, that you know what can be traded and what needs to be held on. So I hear nothing but thrilled people at James Talarico. The other lawmakers there, after you were sworn in, came up and said, we're going to take care of him. This is a special lawmaker. And I think we all know that if he stays in this profession, that we will be hearing about him from much higher stations. So, James, I almost said it wrong. Thank you for sharing. We wanted to talk about human values, and you were the first person that we thought of. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
When I was little, I dreamed of being a pastor, but I missed the mark a bit and became a politician instead. I grew up in this church and still find comfort and wisdom between these walls on Sunday mornings. Our pastor, who I still call Dr. Jim, married my parents, baptized me, and gave the invocation before I was sworn in to the Texas legislature. Growing up, I wanted to be just like Dr. Jim, still do. I didn't quite understand the particulars of his role, but I knew he brought comfort to people who were sad. I knew he stood up for what was right, and I knew he never looked scared while doing it. And I try to do those things now in my current role as a legislator, but I still harbor a secret wish to lead a church. So thank you, all of you, for indulging my childhood fantasy today. My mother served as a deacon, my dad served as an elder, which meant I had to be here every Sunday, a lot of Wednesdays, most Saturdays. As a teenager, I taught Vacation Bible School and Sunday School. My two best friends and I even had our own troupe of puppets that we used to teach biblical stories during children's time. I called them Jimmy's Puppets, and for short, we called them Juppets. Inspired by my admiration for another Jim Henson, the creator of the Muppets. My hope is that this talk can be an opportunity to share with a different audience what we talk about here every Sunday. To my fellow congregants who are here, much of this will not surprise you, but to those who are new and to those who maybe watch afterwards, this may be a new opportunity to hear our unorthodox understanding of Christianity. I'll share my model for understanding the world, which is inherently limited by my own biases, my own prejudices, my own experiences, which is why afterwards I want to open this up to you for your comments, your questions, your stories, your thoughts. So this can be a true conversation where we fill in the blind spots and color in the blank spaces. I'm about to mix two things that we are taught not to mix: politics and religion. And it may surprise some people to hear me talking about politics in a church. In fact, some of my fellow progressives may be clutching their constitutional pearls as I speak. And so let me quickly clarify just a few things. Christianity is political. It has been from the beginning. In fact, the symbol behind me comes from a political execution of an activist by an empire. Western Christianity, since its migration from Europe, has tried its best to suck all of the politics out of the church, and with it, all of the meaning. We have forgotten our radical roots. The original gospel of spiritual and political and personal liberation has been supplanted at best by self-help drivel, and at worst, by systematic oppression. In too many ways, some modern churches have become these self-perpetuating social clubs that exist only to amplify and reinforce the tribal instincts of their members, rather than robust prophetic organs of spiritual and societal change. And we wonder why young people across the globe are fleeing the church and organized religion generally. I think if we're going to save the temple, it's up to us to overturn the tables. I grew up here in a very different church, one that I think more closely resembles the mystical and radical traditions of the early Christian movement. My worldview was shaped below the stained glass in this roof. My politics were forged in the controversies that have surrounded our church, from violating our denomination's rule against performing same-sex marriage ceremonies 2 decades ago, to housing an undocumented family today. I was taught from a very early age that Christianity was just another word for breaking rules. Some remarked during my campaign that I reference biblical teachings more than most Democratic candidates. And many politicians, progressives in particular, like to say they keep their faith and their politics separate, that one doesn't influence the other. And honestly, I have never understood that. I think your faith and your politics should inform, challenge, and reinforce each other daily. The Capitol is where I work on what the world can be. The sanctuary is where I dream of what the world could be. That's why my constituents often hear me reference the book of Matthew when discussing healthcare policy, or cite Dr. King's sermons when critiquing political polarization, or quote the group Pastors for Texas Children when talking about education issues. So I'd like to use this time with you this afternoon to explore why I feel that prophetic voices are the ones that can really meet this moment of moral crisis in our country, and that they can help us find our way out. I believe there are 2 competing impulses inside each of us: the ego and the heart. We struggle collectively and individually between these 2 poles every second of every minute, of every hour, of every day. And to me personally, the 2 clearest personifications of the ego and the heart are President Donald Trump and Jesus of Nazareth. These 2 people, to me, crystallize the 2 antithetical paths that are before us. Not a red path and a blue path, not a progressive path and a conservative path. These 2 people represent something much deeper: an inhuman path and a human path. This is not a partisan comparison. Jesus of Nazareth was neither a Democrat nor a Republican, and President Trump is neither a typical liberal or a typical conservative. This is also not a religious comparison. Jesus of Nazareth was not Christian. He was deeply Jewish. And President Trump does not seem to seriously subscribe to any particular faith tradition as far as I can tell. And so I'd like to compare these two figures on a deeper level and use them as stand-ins for the two opposing forces in ourselves. If we're going to redeem the soul of America and our world, we have to honestly confront the evils we face at this particular moment in history. Ancient human impulses of hate and greed and inhumanity that have been amplified and accelerated and monetized by several things: unprecedented demographic change, political tribalism, immoral internet algorithms, and untamed capitalism. Trump is the clearest personification of this larger phenomenon at this moment in human history. And on the grandest scale, we as human beings have made tremendous progress. Across the world, we are more humane, we are more peaceful, more democratic, more healthy, more inclusive than ever before, but we are facing a very real threat to that very real progress. President Trump absolutely poses an existential threat to our democracy, but I believe that Trump and the impulses he embodies scares us so profoundly because he's within each of us. He's a manifestation of our own inclinations toward physical, rhetorical, and spiritual violence against our fellow human beings and our own planet in ways both big and small. We've seen horrific examples of this just in the past month. On August 3rd, a 21-year-old white terrorist drove from North Texas to the border city of El Paso to stop, quote, the Hispanic invasion of Texas, unquote, parroting our president and our governor. He killed 22 people and injured 24 others outside of Walmart, where families were shopping for school supplies, destroying lives and terrifying a community in the name of hate. On August 15th, satellite images confirmed the Amazon rainforest is on fire. Unchecked deforestation caused by industrialists in collusion with the Brazilian government is laying waste to our planet's lungs and the homes of indigenous Amazonian people, accelerating our global climate crisis in the name of greed. And on July 29th, a train belonging to Black Jewel LLC started carrying more than $1 million worth of coal out of the mountains of Kentucky after the company declared bankruptcy. The company's executives used rigged bankruptcy laws to renege on their final salary obligations to their coal miner workers, leaving their families high and dry, devaluing workers and stealing their natural resources in the name of inhumanity. These tragic events illustrate the moral crisis we currently face across the globe: tribal hatred, unfettered greed, and cold inhumanity given license by people who profit off these impulses, made possible by modern technologies, and protected by a polarized and broken political system. Ancient kindling doused with modern kerosene. Hate, greed, inhumanity, these sins are not individual character traits. They are the ocean in which we all swim. They're not a light switch you can turn on and off. Our culture infects each and every one of us to some degree or another. We spend so much time in our current media environment identifying these qualities in others. But instead of binoculars, I think we need a mirror. In what ways are we the bullet piercing in El Paso morning propelled by hate? In what ways are we the fires burning the Amazon fueled by greed? In what ways are we the train barreling through the Kentucky mountains powered by inhumanity? But in the midst of these horrors, we catch a glimpse of another path. In El Paso, hundreds of community members attended the funeral of an unknown victim who had no remaining family at the request of her widower. In the Amazon rainforest, 14 different indigenous communities sidelined their longtime tribal conflicts to unite in solidarity against the Brazilian government and their enabling of industrialists. And in Kentucky, a group of coal miners brought out their lawn chairs and their chewing tobacco to sit on the train tracks and take a stand for the rights of their fellow workers. The 21-year-old white terrorist is us. but so are the hundreds attending a funeral for an elderly woman who had no remaining family. The industrialists burning the Amazon is us, but so are the indigenous communities that are fighting to protect our planet. The corporate executives fleeing their obligations to their workers is us, but so are the fed-up coal miners who are blocking the train. All of these are examples of competing impulses in our own human family. It may seem very easy to amputate one of these parts of our universal body and proclaim loudly, "This is not me." But the more painful and the more necessary question to ask is, in what ways is this me? We're all in spiritual exile, lost in this moral wilderness, and until we're honest with ourselves about that fact and commit ourselves to this inner spiritual transformation, we will never acquire the only tool powerful enough to confront the evils of this world: radical, dangerous, and creative love. Instead of bathing in the warm waters of self-righteousness and smug certainty and tribal instincts, what if we found the courage and the vulnerability to do the difficult work of building a movement based on radical love that could create solidarity between Latinx families of El Paso, indigenous communities of the Amazon, and coal miners of Kentucky? A movement so powerful it could even liberate white nationalists and destructive industrialists and cruel executives. I think the answers to these very difficult questions can be found in our world's greatest prophetic voices, rooted in our world's greatest faith traditions. Christianity, like all religions, is trying to help us understand what it means to be human. Christianity is the tradition in which I was raised. It's the vocabulary I know. Jesus is the prophetic voice in my own life, but it could be, for you, a different prophetic voice from a different faith tradition. Buddha, Muhammad, Moses, Lao Tzu, Thich Nhat Hanh, the Dalai Lama. Or it may be a prophetic voice from history: Black Elk, Martin Luther King, Dorothy Day, Dolores Huerta, Toni Morrison, Mahatma Gandhi, Mr. Rogers. Or it may be a prophetic voice in your own life: your hometown pastor, your third grade teacher, your parent. Think of a person who led with their heart and not their ego, whose inner light lit a different path forward, who embodied a radically different vision of humanity, a prophet for all of us. The person you're thinking of is probably not a politician, perhaps with the exception of Jimmy Carter. As a politician myself, I can tell you that we will not save us. We are inherently compromised. We live and die with popularity, not principle. And that's how our system is designed to work. We may show flashes of moral courage, but only if it also happens to be politically advantageous. The politicians who have shown moral courage when it wasn't politically advantageous are, by definition, no longer politicians. In other words, you don't follow us, we follow you. And I'm not indicting my profession. It's a dirty and noble job necessary for the functioning of democracy, but politicians will not be our salvation. The reason my political party is struggling mightily to pick a presidential nominee is that we are all looking for a politician to save our souls. But that's not our job. That's like hiring a mechanic to provide marriage counseling. Our most popular progressive leaders have routinely danced with the devil. President Clinton passed the '94 crime bill that exacerbated mass incarceration and repealed the Glass-Steagall Act, which ushered in the Great Recession. President Obama earned the title Deporter-in-Chief from immigration rights activists and aggressively expanded drone airstrikes across the world. Even on the campaign trail, our most progressive candidates still use the same violent and bullying rhetoric that we claim to be against. In a 20-minute interview last year, Senator Elizabeth Warren used the word fight once a minute. Our progressive leaders and activists use gun metaphors, war imagery, and dehumanizing language about our opponents all the time. And I, too, am guilty of making morally compromised decisions on the floor of the Texas House and using negative tactics on the campaign trail. By adopting a Trumpian ethos to confront Trump, we join his circus. Every time we return hate for hate, bullying for bullying, brutality for brutality, we all become less human. Don't mistake me. I am not calling for some empty civility or some superficial kumbaya, because politics is literally a matter of life or death for all of us, especially for folks who don't look like me. But these contradictions are to be expected from politicians because we operate within the same morally compromised system that is wounding our world. That's why we have to look to leaders operating outside of these systems for guidance and direction. The Trump path that lives within each of us is well represented every day on television, in the halls of power, and online. We see it every single time we open our laptops or turn on the TV. We have elected the personification of one end of the spectrum of humanity. So to reckon with this, we must look to a personification of the opposite end. And in my own life, that's a woodworker from ancient Palestine. If we're going to change directions, we have to adjust our own compasses to figure out where to head. What does this new direction look like? I want to argue that Jesus of Nazareth is exactly the example of this better direction for the left and the right at this particular moment in history. The problem is, and there's a big problem, this greatest spokesman for this new direction has been co-opted and silenced by childish religion that treats Jesus at best like a personal genie to grant your wishes, and at worst, a cult leader who demands blind loyalty from his followers. Neither reflects an accurate historical understanding of Jesus the man, nor a deep mystical understanding of Jesus the Son of God. Jesus the teacher spoke in parables and metaphors and riddles. He offered questions rather than answers, which unfortunately make his teachings ripe for piracy. For our purposes, I want to draw a quick distinction between Jesus Christ, an element of spiritual and religious experience, and Jesus of Nazareth, a man of history. It's not quite fair to compare a president to a deity, so let's compare person to person. There are some things that biblical scholars know with a fair amount of certainty about Jesus, the historical figure, and I want to run through and highlight real quick 10 important facts that some of us may not remember or know about Jesus the man. One, Jesus was marginalized. He was born in ancient Palestine as a Jew in occupied territory. The Bible gives us a few clues to this identity, the most poetic of which is that the word of Jesus' birth first reaches shepherds in a field, a class of marginalized people in the ancient world, before anybody else. Two, Jesus was working class. It's often said that Jesus was a carpenter, but now some biblical scholars are pointing to a more accurate translation of the Greek word tekton, which actually means woodworker, an even lower rung on the ancient social hierarchy below a peasant. Three, Jesus learned from radicals. Before starting his own movement, he was a follower of John the Baptist, who is a wilderness prophet that critiqued the political and social establishment of his time and paid for it with his life. Four, Jesus was far out. He was profoundly mystical and spoke in these deeply intimate terms about the Spirit or the sacred, which he called God. He personally experienced this other plane of human consciousness defined by a deep connection with the human and the non-human world. Five, Jesus was subversive. He provocatively undermined the dominant social order of his time and rebelled against established cultural norms like lineage, wealth, and purity. Six, Jesus was a feminist. In a deeply patriarchal society, he invited women to participate in his movement and trusted them as his closest confidants. He also repeatedly used feminine language to describe God, including saying God is womb-like, and describing God using the Hebrew feminine noun for wisdom. Seven, Jesus was clear. In a Bible that is plagued by human inconsistencies, his teachings were remarkably consistent, compelling, and clear. Love and compassion. Jesus believed compassion was a political virtue, not just an individual one. 8, Jesus risked everything. He was the victim of a political execution, sacrificing his own life for his cause. 9, Jesus started a radically inclusive movement. His table fellowships, in which he invited social outsiders to eat with him, was revolutionary in the ancient world. This original Eucharist has been described by theologians as a feast for outcasts and a banquet of nobodies. The early Christian movement, after his execution, was shockingly inclusive. In fact, Paul says, in Christ there is neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, male or female. And lastly, Jesus was a visionary. He imagined, taught, and attempted to create a fundamentally different understanding of our human family, defined by acceptance, belonging, compassion, and love. Jesus of Nazareth was not a prophet for Christianity. He was a prophet for humanity. His teachings demonstrate a new way of living, of thinking, of interacting, and of being based in radical love. It's as much a personal path as it is a universal one. And I think it is more necessary today than it has ever been before. The current president of the United States embodies the opposite path through his character, his actions, and his values. This is not a personal critique of the president. He's merely the most prominent and striking example of the destructive human instincts that live within each of us. The most obvious contrast is between the two figures' character. Trump lives in a golden apartment. Jesus preaches in the wilderness. Trump is elite. Jesus is marginalized. Trump holds grudges. Jesus finds forgiveness. Trump is materialistic, while Jesus is spiritual. Trump is vain. Jesus is humble. Trump is shallow. Jesus is deep. But more important than comparing their personalities, let's take a look at comparing their values. Trump values property rights. Jesus values human rights. Trump practices judgment. Jesus practices compassion. Trump exudes certainty, and Jesus exudes mysticism. Trump sees supremacy. Jesus sees equality. Trump believes in domination, and Jesus believes in connection. Trump thrives on hate. Jesus thrives on love. But perhaps the most compelling contrast is between the two figures and their actions. Trump pursues aggression. Jesus pursues peace. Trump tweets. Jesus prays. Trump builds walls. Jesus builds bridges. Trump provides answers, while Jesus asks questions. Trump creates tribes based on mutual hatred. Jesus creates communities based on mutual trust. While Trump demands military parades to demonstrate his own strength, Jesus rides a donkey into Jerusalem, mocking the traditional concept of strength. While Trump tells those who are different to go back to where they came from, Jesus ate meals with those perceived to be untouchable. And while Trump thrives in the traditional power structures of white supremacy and unchecked capitalism, Jesus subverted power by centering the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed. It's easy to condemn Trump and his character and his values and his actions. It's harder to acknowledge the ways in which we all share those things in ourselves. It's easy to side with Jesus in this comparison. It's harder to admit the ways in which we fall short of his example every day. That's because Trump and Jesus are two sides of the same very human coin. A more timeless and universal way to characterize this difference may be between the ego and the heart. The ego is me. The heart is us. The ego doesn't want to find its source. The heart craves an understanding of its source. Our ego is our internalized culture with its hierarchies and boundaries. The heart is the deep cosmic connection we feel with our fellow humans and our planet. The ego is our personal judge and jury for ourselves and for others. The heart is forgiveness and humor and grace. The ego fears death. The heart celebrates death as part of the never-ending river of life. One is a path of personal and social bondage. The other is a path of personal and social liberation. I think the clearest manifestation of our egos is our social media timelines. Platforms built to create connection have been hijacked by out-of-control capitalism and unrestrained bigotry to create widespread heartache and alienation. Social media algorithms deliberately designed to foster conflict instead of conversation are corroding our own hearts. The artist Jenny Odell calls it algorithmic entombment. Social media has had its benefits, don't get me wrong. It has built a world that is more interconnected. It has made my generation the most empathetic in history. But instead of dissolving our egos, it has supercharged them. Instead of acknowledging our own brokenness, our own failures, our own uncertainty, we create these superhuman portraits of ourselves as perfectly happy, perfectly successful, and perfectly right. And as a politician, I am more guilty than anyone in this room of doing that. The author Michael Pollan reports in his new book that scientists have actually discovered the root of our ego in a brain center called the default mode network, which some scientists call the me network. It's where we create the story of ourselves and help our brain differentiate between ourselves and the immense amount of sensory information coming at us every second. It erects a sort of cerebral wall between ourselves and other humans. It erects a wall between ourselves and the natural world. Scientists have actually discovered that this default mode network lights up when we get likes on social media. But scientists have also discovered there's a way to quiet this region of the brain through things like meditation, mindfulness, fasting, near-death experiences, psychedelics, prayer, or mystical experiences. One of my favorite country singers is a guy named Sturgill Simpson. And in one of my favorite songs of his, he starts out with the line, "Woke up today and decided to kill my ego. It ain't ever done me no good, no how." Unfortunately, we can't completely kill our egos. We'd lose all sense of self. We'd lose all ability to self-reflect. But the task before us is how to tame our egos and get quiet enough to listen to our own hearts, which we at St. Andrew's call prayer. In every situation, ask yourself, am I living out of my ego or am I living out of my heart? Am I following Trump or am I following Jesus? Because the antithesis of Trump is not Biden, it's not Warren, it's not Harris, it's not Castro. It's not even President Obama. The clearest anti-Trump we have is Jesus of Nazareth. His teachings and those delivered by other prophetic voices throughout history show us the way to defeat Trumpism in our world and in ourselves. Ronald Reagan declared, "This is a time for choosing." In 1964, Reagan gave a speech where he said, "You and I are told we must choose between a left and a right. But I suggest there is no such thing as a left or a right. There is only an up or a down." Now, in Reagan's mind, up meant capitalism and down meant totalitarianism. And in the heat of the Cold War and in the post-war economy, these may have seemed like the correct contrasts for Mr. Reagan. But in 2019, I suggest that up is love, down is hate. Up is community, down is tribe. Up is connection, down is inhumanity. And while I disagree with President Reagan's worldview, the thing I most love about that speech is that he's asking us to take sides. He frames this giant political discussion in terms of a personal choice. Another leader whose worldview I do share made the same exact point. Dr. King told us that only through an inner spiritual transformation do we gain the strength to confront the evils of the world in a humble and loving spirit. I think he's asking each of us to personally rediscover a reverence for life itself, to feel humility in the face of cosmic mystery, and to have an unshakable faith in the unstoppable power of radical, dangerous, and creative love. Like any instrument, we must first tune our hearts if we're going to play the universal song that we're meant to play together. This won't be easy. Old ways of living certainly die hard. For me, prophetic voices like Jesus have helped me reckon with my own whiteness, my own masculinity, my own certainty, my own ego. It's a never-ending process, and it's a painful process. but it is absolutely necessary if we're going to become more human. The other day, Dr. Jim illustrated this point with a verse from the Gospel of Thomas, in which Thomas quotes Jesus as saying, "Let those who seek continue seeking until they find. When they find, they will become troubled. And when they become troubled, they will be astonished." So many of the systems and cultures that we live in are designed to strip away our humanity. Our world collapses our identities, our opinions, our politics into a kind of two-dimensional sketch of a human being. But we're not meant to live that way. We have to resist that temptation to flatten ourselves and each other, even if it means becoming troubled. How would an inner spiritual transformation change our politics? Luckily for us, the greatest prophetic voices in history have already answered this question. Nonviolence as a political method was inspired by Jesus and other prophets of peace, founded by Mahatma Gandhi through his Hindu ideal of ahimsa, refined by Dr. King during the Civil Rights Movement, and practiced without notoriety by women throughout history. The leaders of nonviolence have tried to teach us that the philosophy is not merely about abstaining from physical violence, which is fairly easy for all of us to comprehend and adhere to. It's also about abstaining from psychological and spiritual violence as well. It's also strategically deft. I think Joe Baez described it perfectly when she called it organized love. In his sermon about loving your enemies, Dr. King talked about his movement's commitment to nonviolence as both a political and spiritual strategy. He said, "Throw us in jail and we shall still love you. Bomb our homes and threaten our children and we shall still love you. Send your hooded perpetrators of violence into our community at the midnight hour and beat us and leave us half dead and we shall still love you. One day we shall win freedom, but not only for ourselves. We shall so appeal to your heart and your conscience that we shall also win you in the process. And our victory will be a double victory." A double victory is what we should be striving for every day in our politics. I absolutely recognize that nonviolence is much easier for me to practice given my own identity. The personal stakes for me are just inherently lower than for many people. But humanity's prophetic voices, from the Buddha to the Parkland students, should speak directly to each of our hearts. Every day on the floor of the Texas House, my team and I struggle to implement this wisdom in our own politics, and it is very difficult. When faced with cruel letters and comments, we take a breath, we recognize the pain we feel, and then we refuse to pass that pain on. We respond to the writer with authentic love and compassion and empathy. And you'd be surprised, most of the time the writer will reciprocate our kindness after communicating with brutality only moments earlier. We also try to avoid violent words or dehumanizing rhetoric. We try not to use words like fight, battle, or troll. When the legislature passes hateful bills and legislation, we console each other, and then we get right back to work, motivated by a pragmatic optimism in humanity itself. When someone uses discriminatory or hateful language, we resist the urge to call out with fear and anger and shame, and instead follow the advice of activist Loretta Ross and call in with love and trust and respect. When we feel our egos starting to fan those flames of hatred toward our colleagues who have committed an injustice or who have supported some kind of morally reprehensible legislation, we try every time to remember that they too belong to our human family. And in a family, we don't cancel anyone. We heal, we teach, we restore, we hold accountable, but we lead by example. And most of all, we follow a fierce belief in each person's capacity to get better. Now, this is incredibly difficult in practice, and we fail all the time, but I have a little trick, a little cheat. When I feel these feelings, I imagine my fellow legislators as children, and I imagine them like children. I imagine the families who raised them, the teachers who taught them, the friends who loved them. And then I imagine myself as the next link in that chain of people helping them grow. And then I imagine them as the next link in my own chain, helping me grow. All of these actions are rooted in love. It's, like I said, one of the most difficult things you can do. But when the love is authentic, it becomes just a little easier. The love can't be faux compassion. There is no such thing as condescending love. People often wonder how I can joint author legislation with far-right Republican legislators. But when love is your North Star, bipartisanship and moral clarity are not mutually exclusive. We can find opportunities to partner with our political opponents while still steadfastly holding them accountable for their threats to the existence of our fellow human beings. True love means speaking honestly, loudly, and clearly about the injustices in our world, even if it means speaking out alone. Don't get me wrong, I feel rage, I feel anger, I feel pain, I feel the urge to yell, I feel the urge to retaliate, I feel the urge to hurt. There is a place for righteous anger and moral outrage. People are dying because of our politics. But our outrage cannot consume us. We have to channel it into something new, something better, something creative. While my own privilege makes this process a lot easier, the Black feminist poet Audre Lorde warned all of us that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Love is the only way out. In these times, love can be an unpopular strategy. There may be people rolling their eyes at the idea as I speak. But I have yet to hear another solution that will lead us out of this moral wilderness. The greatest problem that we currently face, and the root of all our other problems, is our lack of connection with the human and non-human world. Our species evolved from a delicate and precarious balance between each other and our planet. And as that balance has atrophied, our species and our planet have both become sick, physically and spiritually. We need each other. We know it when we gaze up at the night sky. We know it when we look into the eyes of a child. We know it when we come face to face with nature's wonders. We know it when our dog welcomes us home. We know it when our neighbors come to our aid. And we know it when we feel deep connection with an absolute and total stranger. I'll confess, I am a sucker for sappy internet videos. And sometimes a viral video can strike a chord. Sometimes wisdom can be delivered by a pop singer. Sometimes a top 40 hit can say something profound about a moment in time. And this was the case when I watched pop star Andy Grammer sing with a group of students from PS 22 on Staten Island. Students of different identities and backgrounds sang in this heavenly chorus as Andy strummed his acoustic guitar and led the kids in singing the words to one of his songs. I will fight for you, I always do, until my heart is black and blue. And I'll wait and reach my hand out in the dark for yours to interlock. And I will hold on to you no matter what this world will throw. It won't shake me loose, because I'm not giving up, even when I'm down to my last breath, even when they say there's nothing left, even when nobody else believes, I'm not going down that easily. So don't give up on me. This is difficult work, and our hearts are certainly black and blue, more for some than others. But we can't give up on each other. We can't give up on love, because at the end of the day, we're all we have, floating all alone on a little tiny green and blue island in an infinite universe. I got some heat in my first campaign from my fellow progressives for saying that I pray for Donald Trump. But I won't apologize for that. I refuse to succumb to the hate and the greed and the inhumanity that lurks in my own ego. I remember the teachings of Jesus that I learned in this very sanctuary, and I struggle mightily to stay on that path. So yes, I pray for President Trump. I pray he remembers compassion. I pray he remembers love. And I pray he remembers his place in our human family. I believe each one of us learned these things as children. Now we just have to remember. We have to remember our way back to each other. We have to remember our way back home. Thank you so much for being here and for listening. Thank you. So now I'd like to open this up for any thoughts, questions, comments, challenges, whatever you'd like to share, come over here, and Steve has the microphone. You can just line up behind him. If you are not able to get up or move over to him, just raise your hand and he can come find you. We have just limited time, so let's try to keep it brief, which I recognize is rich coming from a guy who gave a 30-minute speech. But if we can, let's be succinct. And I'll try to do the same thing.
Jesus came to serve and to do justice. Can you talk a little bit more about justice? A lot of us do not understand what justice means.
Yeah, such a great question, and I feel like our team in particular tries to center justice and challenging injustice as part of our everyday work. And it can be seen in some of the legislation that is passed by our legislature, but it can also be seen on a micro level by the interactions our legislators have with some of our citizens. And I think the key in what our team has tried to do is always be able to speak out clearly and loudly against those, while still seeing the humanity in our colleagues. And that balance, like I said, is so incredibly difficult to find, but it's incredibly necessary if we're going to find our way out of this crisis that we face.
So I grew up here in Austin, born and raised actually. But when I was growing up, as you know, so many kids do, I oftentimes had a lot of opportunities to ask why, like why something happened, and it drove my parents nuts, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with. But and ultimately, though, I think that question of why leads us down to the ultimate question of why, and nobody ever really had an answer for me growing up about like why we're here and what our purpose is and what's the point, and that's not anybody's fault. We live in a society that doesn't really ask those sorts of questions. It doesn't really challenge us to ask those questions of ourselves. And I think that ultimately it's because of fear. I think that there's a guy, Terrence McKenna, who said that the challenge is not to find the answer, it's to face the answer. And ultimately, I think that we all know that there's no easy way out of this, that it's going to take hard work, and ultimately, the way I like to see it is as empathy. It's love, the same sort of message, to be able to understand somebody else as a complete individual with a history and reasons for being that are unique to them, and to put yourself into their shoes long enough to recognize that what they believe and what they say is entirely due to their experience in this world, their unique experience in this world. And to be able to do that, to be able to exit yourself, negates some of the effect of that ego. And I think that really, though, empathy will save us from all of the challenges that we're facing today. And it's tough, I think that in so many cultures, we find that there is this idea of balance. There's the Tao with the yin and the yang, opposing forces that hold the world together. In Hinduism, with is it Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. But they're two halves of the same whole, and they're two sorts of energies that keep everything together. But in the same way, in our political system, liberals and conservatives are opposing forces that hold the world together. And I think ultimately we've lost that balance. And the way to achieve that balance is by practicing that sort of aggressive empathy, to really put yourself in somebody else's shoes. But I really appreciate everything that you've said today. It's beautiful, and it's nice to be reminded of the fact that other people think the same way, ultimately. But thank you.
Thank you. That's beautiful. I love that. How are you, sir?
I'm all right. James, how you doing?
Very good.
I woke up this morning, folks. I've met my representative this year and became an activist for a number of different people. And I woke up this morning with just an overwhelming feeling of gratitude that I can't describe. And started writing my thoughts down. And as I was just kind of meditating, I guess, it just occurred to me how grateful I am that people like yourself have stood up for me. as I age and get older, and you're young, I look at my life and I go, well, what brought me here, and what would, if you could do things over again, I'd be a more grateful person. You see, and I think what he's hit on the most tonight is, the prophetic, progress that we can make if we'll just, love. I don't know much about spirituality, and I'm challenged by it every single day. But, and I've been, like he was mentioning, a venom salesman, on social media, and I think a lot of us are guilty of that. We get challenged by our opinions, and it's just an opinion. It's not necessarily fact. It's, and we're arguing over, are you a person? I mean, can you be a people today? Is what I'm challenged with every single day. And I just wanted to tell you one more time, we're fixing to head out and everything, I just wanted to tell you one more time, thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I wanted you to have those words. I wrote them down. Take these. There's pearls in there. I had coffee and those were my thoughts, and I figured, well, I needed to say thank you, and I wrote it down. Keep that with you.
Yeah, I will.
And get some barbecue.
You have that? And for those who know Clint, he's been one of the best activists for legalizing marijuana, which is an incredible important issue, and I know many of us care about. And so he's been a clarion voice on that issue.
Yeah, it's good to see you. It's good to see you, Mr. Talarico. I met with Jeff, one of your staff members, the first person I ever met, and I remember thinking, if you can judge someone by who they surround themselves with. And then I met the rest of your staff, and I thought, okay, this guy's got it. This guy's got it. So let me just say,
they're all right. They're all right.
They're fantastic people, and they're really smart. I am not grateful for our current president. I am not grateful that he's there. However, I'm very grateful for the crisis that it's brought upon our political conversation, because for the first time since I've been alive, people are asking questions of the identity of their own party. And I'm asking people in my own congregation, go ahead. I'm asking people in my own congregation, if they want to make a difference, then go to the party of your choice and go and call them to account for who they are and what they say. It's a lot easier for me to do that here because you're saying a lot of stuff I like to hear. So that being said, I want to thank you for the work you're doing. I want to encourage everybody to pray for Representative Talarico and keep him going and send him money.
If the IRS is watching, we don't endorse that statement. Don't take away our tax-exempt status as a church. You're good, Sam.
All right, we're going to mix it up a little bit. So I kind of disagree with you. I think love is a powerful thing. I think pragmatism is powerful, but it's not as defined as engineering or mathematics. So it leaves a huge gap, and that's where faith comes in. And to me, faith kind of, muddies the water, right? And so to me, if we go back about 2,500 years, this problem is not new, right? We go to Athens, right? We have all these different people coming in. This is right, that's right. And Socrates gave us reason and logic through the elenchus, right? The dialectic. We ask the questions. That's what's missing here. Trump has given his supporters the fake news. They don't even have to hide their lies in rhetoric or obfuscate them in statistical sampling errors. Now they can just reject basic facts. And the only way we're going to beat them is by using reason and logic. Love is great. I love all of you. But until we learn how to talk to them, like the Tucker Carlsons, until we take them down with their straw men, their ad hominem attacks, we're never going to make any progress. And the problem is the alternative to the right has been, excuse my French, horrible. Right? I mean, we can't keep putting people up there who are Republican light, who don't espouse the progressive values we have, and don't use reason and logic. That's the only way we're going to beat these people. because we have to use facts. And real quick, read The Prince, Machiavelli, by Machiavelli. He gives us the tools. Sometimes you have to reach in that bag and be a dirtbag. So they deserve it. We have to give it to them.
What was your name, sir?
Joseph.
Hi, Joseph. Thanks for being here. And I think we talk about this in the sanctuary every day, that spirituality and listening to your own heart is certainly not mutually exclusive with logic and using the brain that you've been given. And so I don't find too much to disagree with you about ensuring that we are that we're being logical in our arguments, and that we're appealing to people's objectivity and using facts. I think the two don't have to be in conflict with each other. But I appreciate that, and thank you for sharing. Daniel. Introduce yourself so everybody knows who you are.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm the Minister of Spiritual Formation here. I work with our youth, and we've had 8 of our youth in your talk. And one of the youth noticed that you didn't call yourself a liberal or a conservative, but a progressive. And that youth was wondering if you could explain progressivism in your understanding.
Don't read too much into it. I consider myself a liberal too. So, I like the word progressive, but I consider myself a proud liberal. I think there has been there may be political scientists in here who can explain the history better, but there's been some attempts by the Democratic Party, by liberals, by the progressive movement to try to move away from the word liberal because it's been weaponized in political conversation. Just in terms of political strategy, I always think it's better to reclaim things that you think are true to yourself or your movement, which is why I think here some of us are reclaiming the idea of faith and Jesus as a figure. I think those things are important if you're going to ultimately win hearts and minds and not just win elections. But great question to whoever, the youth who asked that. The youth. Now I feel old.
Hi,
Dale.
I'm Dale, and I've been dealing with the president for quite a while, like many of us have. But I'm starting, especially in the last few months, I'm starting to really feel sorry for him. He must really be tormented. And I think when you look at someone that it must be hurting inside the way he is, I don't think we can hate him.
That was beautiful. Yeah. And I'll just say Dale is one of our activists in Williamson County, and it's actually an inspiration to me because Dale sends me almost daily emails, a lot of us, about the climate crisis and about the latest developments in that. And when I was on the campaign trail, I was like, why is this guy sending me so many emails? But then for some reason I started to find that I was talking more about climate change in my campaign, so it worked, whatever he was doing. But I just admire that commitment to a single cause and being relentless about it. So your whole family, y'all are just treasures for us. So.
God bless you, Dale.
That's right.
My name is Mary, and I am so proud that you are my representative. So I get to vote for you.
Thanks.
And I work for you too. But I have a question. It might not be evident, but I'm sensing here that maybe you had some influence. The commentators said about this past legislative session that it was less contentious as usual. So could you give us one example of how maybe, not in terms of legislation, because still some terrible, terrible things got passed, but could you give us an example of maybe where this positive love of your enemies, not your enemies, but of your opponents, how this has moved it to become more civil?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I worry, since the session has ended, there have been some political scandals and the current mass shootings, which rightly so have kind of really gotten people more emotional and more fired up, and our kind of tentative peace that we struck during the session is starting to fall apart a little bit and fraying at the edges. But if we're asking for a cause for why that occurred, you always have to look, in politics, you have to look back to the voters, because they're what we rely on, that's who we follow direction from. And in 2018, at least in my community in Round Rock, Williamson County, I saw something remarkable of people in many ways setting aside pure partisanship and searching for something deeper, something like human decency in the election. And I think that message got through loud and clear to people on both sides of the aisle. So don't give us too much credit. We take the lead from you. and we take the lead from the electorate and from our communities. And the message that all of you sent was that we need something better than just a D and an R. We need something a little deeper, a little more human. And I hope we can even amplify that more in 2020. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Felicia, and I am truly proud to be amongst you this afternoon. One of the things that I wrestle with, I think, is holding on to the American value. I grew up in Mississippi, and I have been amongst the Confederate flag. I know what that's like. I know what it feels like. But in the midst of it, I was never threatened by it the way that I feel today. Today is so rich in our culture to where, like, when will we truly stand up, regardless of color? When will we stand? And I know I've worked in the school system as an educator. I've stood up for children. I've stood up for in times where it's difficult. But when will we stand for each other? We are Americans, and at some particular time, we have to look at the fabric of that. We are passing something on to the next generation. So how do we get through this as a country and as a culture without looking at, oh, she thinks she's better than me, or people have had to work to become who they are. I am very proud of Representative Talarico because he had to work as a young man, and I look at his story to be who he is. So we must respect that people have earned the right to be who they are. I will continue to support him. He is not my representative, but he has reached out in this community in a way that some others are not. So we must recognize that he is a jewel sent to us and do everything we can to support him.
Well, that was just like we rehearsed, so that was great. I want to quickly say just two things, because I really love your comments. One is that the pain you feel when you see the Confederate flag, you feel viscerally. Myself as a white man, the other white faces in this crowd, it's a different pain, and ours is more theoretical. And so thank you for sharing that. Two, I often think when reclaiming symbols, I think about the American flag. I think the Confederate flag is a symbol of treason and terrorism, but the American flag is such a complicated symbol for most of us, and in many ways, like Jesus, like the cross, it's been co-opted and in some ways, its true meaning has been betrayed. So that resonated with me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi again.
Hi again.
We're spending the whole weekend together. We were at a meeting yesterday together. So
yes, we are, and that's what I wanted to get up and say.
Yes, please.
I met Representative Talarico yesterday, and he's the real deal. He rolls his sleeves up, he gets in the community, and he is really walking the talk. I just wanted to get up and say thank you for not being a counterfeit, that we can pull up and we can see the real person. And I just wanted to get up and congratulate you on your genuineness. And then I wanted to encourage you to keep on keeping on. Thank you.
Before you sit down, first, as a politician, I appreciate the words of affirmation. That's our fuel. But second, do you want to share real quick about what's, I think, happening on Monday with the district? I think it's important for everyone here to know. Okay. I can share too, but I don't know if you have the details of.
Okay. Well, we are having a task force on safety tomorrow in the Round Rock School District, and they're trying to pull policing into our system, and we're not happy about it as parents. And just because of some of our history, it's not safe. It's not a good choice for people of color, children of color. And so Representative Talarico came in with some heavy lifting that he can provide as much as support. It's just very good in this day and hour that we have each other's support. So I want to thank you, and you can take it from there.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
again, we often, many of us talk about how to be an anti-racist, and so this is a perfect local example. The Round Rock ISD school board has called a meeting, which is different from their scheduled meeting, so make sure you're careful when you look online. This is a called meeting. They just notified everyone. It's happening on Monday, and we'll share information on our Facebook page, but they're trying to create an in-district police department in Round Rock ISD, the district that raised me, raised many of you, and all of the education research, the lived experiences of people of color in our community will tell you that having more police in our schools will disproportionately impact our students of color, in particular our black boys, and they will be the ones targeted by more police inside of our education system. So if you feel strongly about this, I hope you do, and you want to put kind of your thinking and your Facebook posts into action, I hope you can come on Monday. Find the details on Round Rock ISD's website, also at the group Undoing Racism, which is the group that she was referring to yesterday that met. And I hope you show up, and I think it's especially powerful for white folks in our community to speak out in very clear language about why this is important to us, right? We may not have a black boy at home, but that child is our child, and it impacts us just as much. And so I hope you'll be able to come and speak on Monday. Thank you for the plug.
Today was an experiment. It might have worked. This is the first of 3 scheduled speakers we have lined up for St. Andrews for our series, Searching for Humanity, Our Common Thread. We thank you so much for being here, and we want you to fill out the survey form and let us know how we did, but we also would please put on your calendar October 13th. Kate Lincoln Goldfitch will be our speaker on immigration attorney situation on the border. Hopefully you'll get to learn more about that. The day is not quite over. Please join us for coffee and cake and more time with James and more questions. But we thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy Sunday schedules to be with us today. Thanks, Jim Rigby. Any final? We're good? Thank you all. Please put us on your calendar and come back again. Thank you.